Thank you so much, Steven, for saying yes to my invitation to share about resilience and discover together with me. Thank you for your courage to discover.
Absolutely.
Thank you. So a little bit about Steven. Steven works for Legal Shield Business Solutions, and he helps mitigate employees' distractions. So in a way, it helps employees become more resilient. That's how we kind of started talking about resiliency when we met recently. And I invited you. So thank you for your courage and generosity. Anything else you would like to add?
No, not at all. You said it quite well. Yeah, I work for Legal Shield Business Solutions, and like Lucy said, we mitigate employee distractions, and I think it's pretty close to resiliency. And before we got on this, I made sure that I had the correct definition of resiliency. And according to Webster's here, it's the ability to recover quickly from difficulties or tough situations. And a lot of what I do is I help businesses to help their people, especially when they're dealing with personal, legal, or identity theft situations outside of work, to get some resources to take care of that so that they can recover from it quickly and they can get back to focusing and really enjoying the job that they enjoyed when they first signed up for it.
Yeah. So that's a different level of resilience in a way, supporting and putting the support structure in a way in place. So when something happens, like a preventative resiliency, almost sounds like. But before we even go there, what I ask each guest is, what does resilience mean specifically to you personally?
That's a good question. I'd have to say specifically to me, resiliency, very close to the definition that I just quoted. I would say it's the ability. Let me back up a little bit. Life is tough. I think we can all agree with that. Personally, I have a very interesting story. I was undiagnosed ADHD as a child, and I spent the better part of 27 years thinking I was a complete failure and an idiot. And that was reinforced time and time again from people who just thought I was very lazy or couldn't pay attention. A good way to put it is I was always the kid. And when I first heard this put to me this way, it was I had some tears coming out. I was always the kid who, when the teacher was halfway through explaining the math lesson, I was still trying to find my pencil. I just couldn't get it together. And now I understand that as a result of a lack of a couple of different chemicals in my brain, it's very hard for me to focus. I have to do other things. I have to take certain medications, and I have to practice certain mental techniques so that I can pay attention, whereas a neurotypical person might have a more easier time doing that. But we all have problems. If you don't have ADHD, you might have something else. We all have difficulties. But for me, and I tell this story because resiliency is the ability that I found, not necessarily within myself, but through faith, through help, through people, through therapy, through a lot of smarter people than I am, taught me that it's okay to fail. It's okay to get knocked down, and it's okay to have problems happen in your life. A lot of it's unavoidable. All you can control are the way that you react to them and the way that you move forward with the resources that you have. So not to be redundant, but the resiliency, the way that I see that word is my ability specifically to stand back up, to keep walking, and on the days that I want to stand still, to make sure that I don't take any steps backward. And anybody who's able to even take just one step on their worst day, that makes you resilient.
Can I ask you questions about that? What you just shared?
No, please do.
Thank you. First of all, wow, that must have been really tough. I'm sorry you had to go through that for so many years, feeling that way.
Thank you. It was definitely, I didn't know it. I just thought that I was a very unintelligent person, and that was just kind of the way God made me, so to speak. And it's a little, but it's very freeing when you find out that for me, I know a lot of people and I won't jabber on here, but a lot of people thought that I would be very discouraged and have asked me like, has that made you mad or sad when you were diagnosed with, and it's ADHD and a generalized anxiety disorder.
Yeah.
But for me, I'm like, no, it's free. I now know that that's not me. I'm not ADHD or anxiety. I have to deal with that. That's a problem I have to deal with. But Steven is not an extremely overly stressed person who can't focus. That's a problem that we can work with. So yeah, it's unfortunate that I had to go through it, but in a way, it's made me who I am today.
What would you say helped you through all those years? It must have been extremely challenging.
Yeah, well, as far as help, because I didn't have any really outside help. What's difficult too, and I love my parents. They did a fantastic job raising me and they just didn't understand what was going on.
They didn't know, yeah.
Right, but from their point of view, what it looks like, and all of my teachers too. Some of my teachers didn't have a lot of mercy. All they see is a kid who he must be lazy because he's smart enough to do all of his work and do it decently last minute, right? He can get it done when he has to. And I can see how that looks lazy, like he's all the way up into the last minute, then he blasts out an amazing paper. Imagine what that guy could do if he would just apply himself 24/7. But the problem is in the ADHD brain, we work under pressure because that's when the focus finally comes back. So it's the motivation is not normally there for me. So all of my life, it was just the way, and I have to explain a little bit about how ADHD works, because there is a lot of misconceptions that we all have a little bit of it, or maybe somebody's like, oh, my ADHD again. But people who truly have the condition, like myself and my wife has it too, the problem is that it's happening right now. The problem is that something has to be very interesting to me in order for me to want to do it. And what I mean by that is that my brain has to be stimulated enough in order to truly pay attention. So if you hand me a math assignment that I've done a couple of times and you want me to do homework, it's going to be tough to be motivated, even if it means I might fail, even if it means I may not get my dream career. Those are long-term goals that I just can't see the same way that other people would see. Now, if you hand me a video game, I will be motivated to play that for hours. Reason is because there's an instant gratification, or rather, I think they call it in psychology, it is a instantaneous feedback loop. So that if I press a button or move a character, it happens on the game and it immediately comes back to me that I controlled that I accomplished something. And I then produce dopamine and norepinephrine. So the way that I dealt with this most of my life is I would do a lot of things last minute, because even though fear is not a fun motivator, it is a motivator. So I spent most of my life just, I got to get this done. I got to get this done. And just constant stress, which is probably where the anxiety disorder developed. And I finally was able to get things done. And then of course that translated out to looking like it's just a lazy kid who couldn't apply himself, but I just couldn't focus to apply myself until it was too late. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, and thank you for sharing that. I can tell, it's something deep, and thank you for your courage and vulnerability and sharing. And it's a huge gift, because I'm sure there's many other people, or even that are still going through that they have heard it. You're lazy, or they keep telling themselves, oh, I'm just lazy, I need to push myself. And maybe it's just they don't know that they have the condition. And I usually, that's my personal belief, I don't think anybody is really lazy. Lazy is kind of like a label for something that's really underneath going on.
If you don't mind, I'd like to agree with you on that, because I'm the same belief. I don't think anybody wants to be lazy. I don't think anybody wants to have a problem, but I think problems exist, and they may not know they exist. And then of course that's where the labels can come in, and we believe we're lazy, or someone believes they're lazy, like, oh, Lucy's just lazy, she just doesn't want to get it done. But in reality, what's causing that? There's always a cause. I don't think that anybody truly wants to be a non-productive person. We just have issues we don't know about.
Exactly. Yeah. So thank you for sharing that, because that could help somebody who is perhaps watching say, maybe, maybe I'm not lazy, maybe there's something deeper going on. And it could start the exploration with curiosity. And what I'm hearing, there must have been a lot of judgment, and there was judgment from teachers, from, I don't know if parents or any other people, and probably from yourself. Um, and we have touched on it with some other people who were talking about resiliency, of how it actually beating ourselves up and the labeling can be actually damaging.
Absolutely. Just to kind of piggyback off of what you said, I think you're absolutely right. I know what was established in me and my wife also, who deals with a major depressive disorder. We create, as a result of the people who think we're lazy, or in my wife's case, she's just sad all the time or unmotivated. Because depression does cause a lack in serotonin levels, which makes you, even if you get enough sleep, you can't move. You don't have the ability, or I think it's norepinephrine is actually the chemical that helps us move. And as a result of that and the judgment, if we get told we're lazy or we're sad or we're failures enough times, we start to believe it. And then, of course, if we fail, that reinforces that, and it creates something, and I'm sure there's other terms for this and other things, but it creates a type of failure complex. And we almost expect to fail. And that's something I still struggle with greatly. And I've been putting in a lot of effort over the last couple of years to overcome it. I've been reading a lot of books, focusing a lot on prayer and other things, just trying to remember, or to tell myself that I'm not who I thought I was or who I have to be. But it's hard because, quick example, in the what I do, I may be speaking to a prospect and I may get told, Steven, at this time, we don't want to bring your services on. And that's okay, because it may not be the right time. It may not be the right fit. And for most people, it's going to be like, okay, on to the next person. We'll follow up at this point. But for someone like me, it takes me almost a full 10 minutes to convince myself I didn't mess up. The world is not falling down around me. My family's not going to starve. I'm not going to die or explode. The prospect doesn't hate me. Like, none of that's true. But because of how long I believe that, I've created neural pathways in my mind that have become a survival mechanism of, you need to run away before you die. Run away, get away from the big scary monster. But none of that's true. None of that's true at all. And I think it's not just people like me, it's anyone who has dealt with resilient or tried to build resiliency in their life and who has failed time and time again. It's so far from the truth, because we're some of the strongest people around, but we just don't believe it. It all comes down to what's happened and what's reinforced our belief.
You are bringing up a very important point of what are we telling ourselves about ourselves? What do we believe? And by the way, if it takes you only 10 minutes, that's amazing accomplishment.
Sometimes.
That's amazing, because and a fear of failure and rejection, that's a theme I hear so often. I wish, that's why I kind of bring these conversations, and thank you so much for sharing, because I feel people need to hear that all of us are struggling with this. This is not, oh, I'm the only one who is dealing with this. I talk to people, there's so many people. And so thank you so much for sharing, and thank you for the courage to actually say, I still struggle with this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it is a process. It is a process for all of us. I'm still struggling with so many things that I'm aware. And the more I'm aware, the more I see the things I want to work on. So thank you, because sometimes could be another tool how we can beat ourselves up. At least I did that in the past. Well, I've learned it so many times. Why I keep still why do I keep doing this? But it's a practice in a way. I just talked yesterday about resilience to somebody else who said it's a daily practice.
It really is. It really is. It reminds me a lot of, because me and my wife are also, it's funny, me and my wife are like the same person. we both have had the
You're
same
a great
struggle.
match.
Right. Yeah. The only problem is, since we both have ADHD, sometimes the conversation never gets to where it was supposed to go. And then a week later, we'll be like, oh yeah, just go all the way around. But one thing that try to gather my thoughts here. One thing that we both struggle with is we're both ex-addicts, and which isn't surprising because people with ADHD, or even people with on a certain spectrum of autism, which has very similar overlapping symptoms, bipolar, manic depressive, things like that. We all have addictive personalities, and a lot of it comes down to we don't have enough chemicals going in the brain that would make us feel good, satisfied, or useful. And so we try to find that other places. But what you maybe think of is, in regards to this, what I've tried to help myself believe, and I actually think I read this in a book by Dale Carnegie. I want to say this was in his book, which is I always get the title wrong. I think it's How to Stop Worrying and Start Living, or Worry Less and Live More, something like that. He points out a very specific difference between shame and conviction. And when we beat ourselves up, which is so natural for me to want to do, I just want to beat myself to death because of I messed up again. There's no circumstance where that ever will help you, ever. That's what I believe. And that a lot of that comes from shame. Well, I deserve this. Or my wife has dealt with suicidal thoughts a lot. And when we talk about, where those thoughts come from, she talks a lot about how it comes from I deserve it, or it's just where I'm going. But shame is actually a thinking error. It's not a proper way to think. I think there's some evidence that it's our brain vastly misinterpreting what our amygdala is trying to tell us emotionally. But what we want to aim for is we want to aim for conviction. And if we, I think this ties into resiliency, because here's the difference between being resilient and not being resilient. If you get knocked down, shame says, stay down, you're just going to fall again. Conviction says, you fell down because you hit a rock. You now know there's a rock there. You know it's wrong to try and step on that rock. So why don't we try a different path next time? Yeah, you may hit another rock, but that's okay. Maybe you need to get a different shoe. Shame says, no, there's always going to be rocks. Conviction says, we're obviously doing this the wrong way, but there's a right way. We're going to learn from it. And that's, I think that's kind of the battle for all of us, is trying to separate those two thinking methods.
Yes, thank you so much for bringing that. This is such an important topic, and especially about mental health, I don't want to say the word illness, but mental conditions, any form of mental health on any spectrum.
A learning disability is
the learning disability. Yeah. I think that's such an important topic, and it still seems there's a huge stigma about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's another thing that I wish people talk more about, because we could support each other and families with this condition. And and you've mentioned another, like shame. Shame is almost, if I hear it correctly, shame is telling the person, there's sometimes don't even try. You're just wrong person. I believe Brené Brown distinguish between shame and guilt. Shame, I am wrong. Guilt, I did something wrong.
Right. And that's similar. Yeah. Don't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
No, yeah. So it seems it's very similar about the shame feeling when we are making ourselves wrong, instead of looking, okay, this is part of the condition. This is the part of me, kind of dissociating almost, or distinguishes who am I versus what is the behavior. Doesn't make sense? What's coming up?
Absolutely. I think you made perfect sense. And I think that's probably what I was trying to think of, but you hit the nail right on the head. It's, conviction works, but guilt is I did something wrong, and shame is I am wrong. And separating the I am, and that's why I was so happy when I found out that I had ADHD, because I could then take the inattention and the laziness and all this stuff and say, oh, that was a problem.
That's not me.
I'm not that problem. I just have to deal with it. So yeah, you're right. Very good point.
So in that part of because you felt some relief in that moment. Absolutely. And you can identify something. So maybe for somebody who's watching and we're still feeling, okay, I'm wrong. There's something wrong with me. Or I am not good enough. What would be something that they could say to themselves? What is something that that has you move forward every day, and you've you've been dealing with a lot of stuff, it sounds like, and thank you for sharing. Yet you're still showing up for this interview fully, and you're still very well spoken. Um, and we don't know each other much, but I really appreciate your generosity that you're sharing all these things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I mean, as far as me, I know that my mentor calls it being vulnerable.
Yeah.
Other people call it transparency.
Yeah.
And for me, it's just if I tell as many people as I can, it keeps it healthy to me. Not necessarily like I can't pay attention to go run around telling the world, because some people don't care. But Lucy, like you said, we just met each other about a couple of weeks ago. But based on our first conversation, when we talked a little bit about this, I immediately knew that you understood enough of it for me to say, yeah, these are the problems I've been dealing with. And I think it's very important, first and foremost, to get that out, to bring what's in the dark out into the light, because otherwise it stays inside of you. And here's the problem with the way we think, and this is everybody. This is, you can have no conditions and you're still going to have this problem. The human brain it kind of trends towards the negative. And there's a lot of reasons and beliefs as to why that is, but it just seems to do so. If you don't ever work it out of your head in a couple of ways I'll mention here shortly, it will build, and unfortunately you'll probably believe that it's true, which is why I came to the belief that I was not a smart person pretty early, around 10 or 15 years old. Just didn't think that I would ever be good at anything, and I thought I accepted that, but it also made me not try to do anything great, because it was like, stay in your lane kind of thinking. But my advice, first and foremost, would be, if anybody tells you, just cheer up if you're depressed, or just try harder to pay attention, or just don't worry about it, it doesn't work. I wish it worked that way. If somebody told me, Steven, stop worrying, we wouldn't be talking today. I'd be fine. I wouldn't have met my therapist or my wife or anybody. I'd be a different person. But anyway, see, there's the ADHD again. Let me bring it back. So there's two major things that I do that help me. The first is get a notebook. It can be digital, it can be paper, it can be anything you want. But whenever you have thoughts, or even if you have a problem, but especially if you have a worrisome thought or a depressing thought, what you need to do is you need to take those thoughts and you need to write them down. And there's a specific, this is called, forget what it's, you're using something called your secondary intelligence when you write something down and read it, because the thoughts are in your mind. That's where they have, that's where they've been birthed. They're in your mind. Yeah. So you want to take them and you want to write them down right here on something else. And then when you look at them with your eyes, you'll actually reabsorb that information through a different part of your brain, which forces you to rationalize it, or rather forces you to properly rationalize it, because you've been rationalizing over and over when it's just in there, which is not a good type of rationalization. But what I do is, if I have a crazy problem, I write it down and I read the problem. I lost customer A who had this many employees. They didn't close on their deal. I don't know how I'm going to pay my bills this month. Real situations I've been in before. And then I write that down. I write down what's worrying me. And then the next thing you want to do is write down, the next thing you want to do is you just want to accept it. Accept the worst case scenario. And this is probably the most important part, because we can't change the future by worrying. And but we can lower the amount of time that we have left on this earth. We can create stomach ulcers and all kinds of terrible things. And there's science behind that too, with cortisol production that happens when you're worrying and your stress levels are up. So if you want to kill yourself quicker, definitely worry, but that is about the only thing you can do. And it's dark, but it's true. But when you write down the problem and then accept the problem, I am not going to make my quota this month. My boss is going to scream at me. My wife's going to be sad. You want to get all the worst case scenario out right away, because half of that stuff's probably not going to happen. But get it all out, put it all down on paper and say, okay. And then you want to take a couple minutes and accept that, make that your reality. I'm sure a lot of people have heard about things like the law of attraction and imagining
Yeah.
your greatest of reality. Well, this is the opposite. You want to imagine the worst possible thing
I
and make
love
it
it.
real
Yeah.
and put it on paper. And what happens is, you'll find out that you don't explode and nothing really happens. You just come to this moment of peace, because once you've gotten it down, the very next step, which is the final step, is now what are you going to do about it?
Mm.
Most of us get stuck because we don't get it out of our heads. Most of us get stuck on we're going to fail, we're going to fail, we're going to fail, because we failed so many times. We're used to it. It's been reinforced. The tidal wave's coming. We don't know where it's coming from,
Yeah.
but we know it's going to come. We don't have a bucket of water big enough to catch it. And that's ridiculous in and of itself. But if you write down the tidal wave's coming and there's nothing you can do to stop it, at that point, you now know, okay, maybe I should find a tree to climb. If there's not a tree to climb, maybe I should build a boat. Maybe I should do something, but you're never going to get to anything that would save you until you accept that there's the possibility that you're going to be in trouble.
Mm.
And I think that's the hardest thing for people, especially like me, who suffer with anxiety. And that's a lot of us, is if we confront that fear, as corny as it is, we confront that fear and we accept it, accept that we're going to have to face our worst monster. At that point, we could finally stop and say, okay, now how do we deal with this monster? And most of the time, we're going to find out that there was never a monster there anyway. We just made it into one.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing. I love how specific this tool is. So anytime anybody has this worry or anxiety coming over them, just write it down. Kind of, I had the image, sorry, but just like body expels when we eat something bad, right? It's almost whatever the worry, whatever the worrisome or heavy stuff is in the head, just put it out on the paper. And as that is on the paper, there's some relief, if I'm hearing it correctly, that once you see it actually, and once you do all the bad scenarios and it's on the paper, then you can can pause and see, okay, what is really that I need to do now? Is that so? That's one of the, like, your tool in the resiliency toolbox is to just do a brain dump in a way and just write it all out.
Definitely. And you want to write you want to write out the worst possible scenario. One other thing that I do that's around the same lines is sometimes I'll change it up and I'll go ahead and write down the worst possible thing that could happen. Then I'll write down the best possible thing that can happen. And then what's actually surprising, it's kind of like having the devil and the angel on your shoulder, right? You're going to write down the worst possible scenario followed by the best. And then realistically, it's going to happen somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
And you can actually get a very realistic view of, okay, this could happen, but it's not going to happen. This is too good to be true, but now you get some relief because you're thinking more realistically. And all of these exercises, and I could tell you about 10 more, but all of these exercises are built to get you out of your head and into reality. Because, and I got in the habit of telling myself when I was going through a lot of this 5 years ago, is if I thought about it, it probably isn't going to happen. It's too terrible. Life isn't that bad. And in all honesty, it probably isn't. So
I'm hearing another, in a way, tool, if we could call it that way. And you even mentioned it before, like how we are programmed to think in a certain way. And that certain way is not necessarily true. That, in your case, you said you were not smart enough. But when I talk to you, you seem very smart and intelligent man.
Oh, thank you.
So if we keep having these thoughts, so another tool would be maybe not believe all the thoughts that we're having. As we, maybe when we put the thoughts on a paper, it helps us disconnect from them, that I am not my thoughts. These are just some concepts, some thoughts.
No, you're absolutely right. And that's the point of putting it on the paper. And like, it doesn't work for everybody. For instance, my wife, the notebook thing just doesn't work for her. And she actually does a decent job of working through it in her head. I'm an external thinker, so I just can't, I can hardly think without talking anyway. But when you get it out on the paper, it no longer becomes you. It's now your thought. And if you're thinking, a lot of times, I'm thinking right now, you can't tell if it's a negative thought or if you're just in a bad situation. And if you've thought it most of your life, it's going to take at least the rest of your, well, I'd say the rest of your life. It took me 28. See, I'm 32 years old. I probably started thinking this way around 6 or 7 when ADHD started manifesting, when I could really remember things. And a lot of the habits probably set in when I was 7 or 8. And so for the last, I'm not that great at math, for the last close to 20 years, I have lived this way. It's going to take probably close to 20 years to get free of that, because I got to reteach myself everything. But the great part about that is our brains are neuroplastic. They can be, you can literally become a different person. And I think that's where imposter syndrome tries to sneak in, because it's like, hey, this isn't who you've been. You're being somebody else. And you know what? That's correct. And that's great, because you don't have to be the person you were for 20 years. You can be whoever you want, because we have free will. That's the point.
I love that. Thank you. So when we bring it back to the resiliency, so would that be kind of reinventing the freedom to reinvent ourselves?
I think so. And I think where the resiliency really comes in, and I'm dealing with this again right now, is whenever your closest friends, your family, maybe it's your wife, your husband, whoever it is, when they see you changing, they may not like it, or they may, even worse, like my family thinks I'm the fakest person in the world these days. They don't come right out and say it, but I've heard things and have witnessed things that seem to say, and I even these thoughts I try to put away, but I'm only bringing them out now as a teaching tool, right? But you're going to get the impression that they really don't believe you, and that this is just a phase. Or Steven, we've known you all your life. You'll always be Steven, and that's it. And I'm sorry, but who are they to say that? They didn't create you. I mean, your mom and dad to some extent created you, but not really. They didn't. They didn't. It was biologically, but not any other way. You are who you want to be, because otherwise, I mean, why are we free to do what we want to do? That's the point. It's just, we spend so long thinking we have to be a certain person or think a certain way, and no one is telling us that we have to do that. Maybe there's certain places that you can live where the government or other bodies will try and force you to do that, but they have to try and force you. You can't be forced to be anybody. But you can be whoever you want. And where I apply that to my life is, I mean, and within the bounds of, you have to also accept your flaws and your limitations. ADHD, even though I take some awesome cutting edge medication, which is really the only reason I'm able to maintain focus right now. And I do a lot of therapy with cognitive behavioral therapy to help me to pay attention and to help me not beat myself up. All of that in tune, we have to keep in mind that there's a lot of work we have to do, because we have a problem. We have to accept that problem, and we have to accept that we're probably going to die with that problem. And that's okay. It's more like, what do we do with what we have left? Because we have way more left than we think we do. And sometimes our problems, like ADHD, for example, we have the superpower of hyperfocus. If I can get interested enough in something, I'll never, it will be the best something you've ever seen, because it's all you can focus on. And there's so many other boons you can think of. For the most part, though, it's a problem. And it comes down to accepting it and saying, okay, cool, this is wrong with me. That's fine. That's perfectly fine. But outside of this, I have so much more to give. And then the last thing that I would say is, you want to get to a point where you think, how do I help other people with all of this? Because now being free and repairing myself, how can I help more people? Maybe it's direct. Maybe you want to reach a point to help, maybe kind of like what you're doing, putting out these videos to show people they're not alone. And resiliency is a trait that doesn't require talent. It can be learned and earned. It doesn't have to be bought. It is something you can develop. But also, like in my own personal life, I'm running my own business. I'm running my own branch of what I do. And this is something I never would have thought that dumb, stupid Steven could have ever done. But I've had to change that language and say, no, it's Steven who can work with what he's got. And that's what makes him unique. I'm going off on a tangent, but it's all about how you perceive yourself too. There's a lot of things we could go into.
That's fantastic. So you're bringing an additional kind of tool, like what would be some positive things, almost, well, some people call them affirmation. whatever we call it, or mantra, or whatever, what would be something nice to say about ourselves that would actually be the opposite of beating ourselves up?
Right. Well, it depends. I think this largely depends on who you are and how you think, because I'm kind of weird.
We all are.
Right, right. Well, my mentor is huge on affirmations, and she has them all over her wall. You are great. You will be amazing. You already are amazing. That didn't work for me.
Yes,
And
very
a lot
good.
of and a lot of it's, and of course she couldn't understand it. She was like, it's just because you're not. She's like, come on, man, put it all up. And she's awesome. She's a huge reason of why I've done the things I do, but all I've had to do is find a different style. And a lot of it has to do with how anxious I normally am, but I have to find kind of what I call reverse proofs that I'm not a failure. And the old famous Michael Jordan quote, you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take. I think that's Michael Jordan, pretty sure. That to me speaks volumes, because I'm so worried about failing. But the only guaranteed way to not do well in anything is to just not do it. So from my perspective, whenever I was building my business and I was cold calling people and all
God, that takes
stuff,
some resilience right there.
Right. Well, I was making probably 4 or 5 cold calls, and I was crawling under my desk. I just wanted to cry. I was like, I can't do this. I'm going to fail. But then it clicked one day, and I was like, the only way I can guarantee myself to fail is to not make any calls.
Wow.
And then I started making calls. Yeah. And it definitely takes a whole different type of resilience to make cold calls, let me tell you.
Absolutely.
But for me, the affirmations became here, if you're completely inactive, you're guaranteed to fail. So now I'm like, okay, now that I know there's a guaranteed way to fail, I won't do that thing. Anything I do that's not that is good. And then from there, I start kind of making it better and better. And then I work my way up to affirmations of, I will be an extremely successful social seller on LinkedIn. I kind of believe that now, but only because I had to tell myself the only way that you won't be successful on LinkedIn is to not get on LinkedIn. Does that make sense?
Totally. I love that. So kind of that could be a tool that somebody who says, well, affirmations don't work for me, could be maybe, well, maybe you haven't found the right way to speaking yourself first, and find the right one.
Right. And, just to add to that, like a big reason why affirmations don't work for me is because I don't believe I can predict the future. I don't think that no matter how many times I say I will be the top B2B seller in my industry, I don't think by saying it, anything will change. Now, there are people who believe that, and it empowers them to act. The way that I believe that is, I won't be the best B2B seller if I do nothing. And so that gets me moving. And then from there, I like to, okay, what are the best people doing? And then I find the bits and pieces from the best people. And I'm like, well, this has all been verified to work. I'll do all of this. And the more evidence I have behind that, the more believing and motivated I get.
I love it. So it's almost like testing and verifying.
Yep. Testing and verifying based off of what other people have done, and knowing that if you do nothing, that's a guaranteed way to fail. So.
That's fantastic. I love it. It reminded me of similar thing that I used to say to myself, and I still say to myself, well, at least I learned something. Even when I fail, at least I discover, okay, this is not the way to do it. So in a way, I created, okay, this is a win by learning something. And in a way, for you, you created yourself a win, because this is a win. When I do something, that means I'm at least doing something.
Right.
Because the failure is not do anything in that situation, right?
No, absolutely. And let me just give you one more tool here. The one that's been huge for me is we always hear a lot about being in an attitude of gratitude, that's a great place to be. One thing, and I heard this from a book from a pastor actually, but he talked about we should be thankful for the things that didn't go our way. And that has really warped the way I think about things in a good way. Just the other day, I a huge deal that that me and my partner were sure was going to go through. We had a great relationship with the company. They had a lot of employees. We thought we were going to really be able to help them. And on top of that, we're like, hey, Christmas is going to be great this year. This is cool. Everybody wins. They just completely disappeared, ghosted us. We have no idea what happened. They're still active, but they're just not talking to us. So that hurts in a lot of different ways. But the only way that I would, and that was one of those things that I could not get through in 10 minutes. I was like, what did I do wrong? What did I say? And you start getting locked up in your head. What did I? But if you stop and say, for me, it's like, I'm like, thank you, God, that did not go my way. And regardless of, where somebody's faith is, I think the act of being thankful for what didn't happen to you that you wanted to happen really makes us think in a different way. It stops us from being self-centered and it allows us to say, what good came from this? There was a person in our industry in Legal Shield, and I forget his name, but he's one of our older legends. I don't think he's with us anymore, but he used to always say, there's good in this, we just have to find it, no matter what the bad was. And even if there's nothing good in it, the fact that, you can't really say it, there's always something good if you look hard enough. And I think being thankful for what did not happen, and then saying, this is going to help me down the road. Somehow this is building my character. Even if I can't see it now, I know that this is good. I think that's a very good state of mind to always be in. Be thankful for what did not happen. Be thankful for the tragedies. And you'll find it very quickly that will allow you to be resilient in the face of absolute walls of fire.
Wow, mic drop there. What it made me think of when I talk with other people, almost like building a door when there's the situation where something happens, there's the tragedy or obstacles or illness or whatever things happen that is difficult to deal with, to bring us to the state that is more empowered. So kind of the door to get from here to here. What I'm hearing is the door is the failure is if we don't do anything, then there's the sure way to fail.
Right. And you make me think of something that a YouTuber said. I think it's ADHD, how to ADHD. She's an ADHD advocate, but she talks about, somebody she had on talked about the wall of awful. And that's always things that we don't want to do. But in your metaphor, whatever that wall is, we have to build a door to get through it. If we try to break through the wall, that's going to hurt us emotionally. It's going to cause a lot of damage. If we try to climb the wall, we're going to be exhausted. But if we can create a door through gratitude or through motivation or through affirmation, that allows us to get through that wall. And now we're back on the journey.
You've mentioned also one more thing, that so maybe sometimes we cannot build the door ourselves. Maybe sometimes we need help from others to help us build the door or open the door, maybe just for the first time. And then we can learn to open it ourselves.
Right.
I've talked to somebody before about there's the shame when we need to ask for help, or the difficulty of asking for help.
Right.
And I see as one of your strengths that you said, well, I'm having the support system in place. From you're working with this person, that person, to really, what would you say to anybody who is in the place where they maybe are afraid to have that support system, to go to a doctor or to work with a therapist or a coach or a certain specialist, whatever the thing is?
Yeah, no, and that's hard because there's so much stigma and shame around it. For one, even just the medication that I take for ADHD, I get a lot of raised eyebrows and a lot of people like, you're taking amphetamines or this or that. And a lot of it's ignorance, but it's also people who just don't know any better about how helpful that can be. And medicine is a huge topic, but I would say to anybody who has anything that's going on with them, you may not even know what the problem is. You just know that life sucks. Things are hard. They're not going your way. And you can't figure out how to get out of this hole that you're in. First and foremost, it's a lot easier to get out of a hole if there's somebody at the top of that hole with a rope. I'm one of those people who does not want any help from anybody. I've been a loner as long as I can remember, and I enjoy my alone time more than anything. But it's actually not. Isolation is probably the worst thing that you can do to yourself. Reason being is, who we are as humans. We're social. We are social creatures. We do better whenever we have help, and there is absolutely no shame in getting help. You are not making yourself less of a man or less of a woman or less of a person by asking for help. In fact, you are making yourself more of a person by asking for help. It takes true resilience to understand that you can't do this alone. And that's okay. And I would ask anybody, show me where in any kind of literature or movie or just show me where even in culture, show me where there's this cultural expectation, or maybe there's a cultural expectation, but show me where logically, scientifically, with evidence, peer reviewed, show me where it's better that we do things alone. It's just not. And getting a second opinion, getting a therapist. Number one, getting a therapist is the best thing I ever did. And it was because I had somebody who finally understood me and was able to show me that my problems weren't me. And you really need somebody else who's qualified, because you need to see, and it doesn't have to be a therapist. It can be a life coach. I think life coaches, what they do is fantastic. My therapist is actually a counselor. He's not even a psychologist.
Yeah.
You just need somebody who is in that world, who knows enough to be able to see what you're dealing with. And you need somebody outside of yourself to tell you that you are not your problems, because that's how you're going to believe it. If you only ever hear yourself, I don't know if you can ever really psychologically separate from it. It's too hard. It's who we are. So
it's like they're adding the new thoughts or the new beliefs almost.
Right. And on top of that, if you have somebody like a therapist or a coach or something like that, if they're able to show you and they're able to resonate with you, where you're like, oh, they do understand me, that creates trust. And you can now trust this person to actually walk you through on the road to recovery. And again, I didn't even know I was sick. I didn't know I had a problem. I didn't know I had a mental illness. I didn't know that.
Yes.
But I had somebody who resonated with me enough to prove to me that they knew what they were talking about, and then show me ways that actually helped me. And from working with a therapist, I went from somebody who went from job to job to job to job. I never kept the job longer than a year. I was the interviewer's nightmare. That's what I always said. I went from somebody like that to somebody who, created their own business. And I have no intentions of quitting this and moving on to this. I have thoughts that tell me all the time, quit, you're going to fail, you're going to do this. But I have got the ability now to look over those thoughts and say, I understand why you're worried, but I got this. But until we can get that higher perspective, we're gonna be the worry.
I love it.
Yeah, I kind of went all over the place there, but no shame. Find help. You need somebody else to tell you in the words that you can understand how to become a better version of yourself, and you will not be sorry. And there's no shame in that at all.
Yeah. Actually makes you a stronger person, it seems like, or because it's not like that you weren't strong before, so strong is not the right word. Maybe how would you describe it actually?
Honestly, resilient. I mean, that's what it is. It's resilience. It's the ability to get knocked down and get back up, except for a lot of us have been down for a really long time. And it really takes true resilience, especially if you're going through a mental health journey, because I'm going to say it takes strength to stand up. It takes resilience to stay standing as you walk through all of this, because you're going to keep getting knocked down and knocked down. Again, I still have those thoughts. I still deal with it. But when you get help, whether it's through medication, cognitive behavioral therapy, a combination of the two is really the key. You can't just do one or the other. You need a help. You need a doctor's guidance. Unfortunately, if we have problems, we got to get help. We got to get help from a lot of different areas. But when you get that, you
Yeah.
can then finally stand up and live the life that you haven't been able to live. And that it takes
Yes.
resilience to stay standing.
Mm. What I call it usually like to put support structure in place. So when something happens, we have the support to lean on, and
Mm,
so we can really keep standing, or when we fall, to have the support that it will be easier to get up.
okay. Yeah. I
Does it-
think I think that that makes,
does it-
yeah, no, I agree with you 100% on that. Yeah.
So in your support structure, in a way, there are people. Usually for me, it's people. It could be the tool of journaling, brain dumping, and it seems like another of your strengths that you've developed is being able to have all the thoughts that have been there for a long time that weren't serving you
Mhm.
there, yet being able to start looking at the new thoughts. Okay, you are still there. And it seems like there was more compassion with that instead of beating it up. Why it's still okay, it's there, but I don't need to believe you. There is a new way that I'm choosing now.
Right. And in regards to brain dumping, I think that's excellent. Every once in a while, I haven't done it recently, but I'll do something I call a thought audit. I didn't come up with that. Again, Pastor Craig Groeschel came up with this. But he says to do a thought audit and to write down every thought that you have. And that can be a little bit of a chore, but I wrote down every thought that kind of came to me while I was working. At the end of the
Wow.
day, I looked down and, there weren't a whole lot. There was maybe 30 or 40 there. And I didn't write down repetitive thoughts or
Yes.
simple thoughts like
Okay.
write this, do that. But like if there was a sentence or a paragraph that came through my mind, I wrote it down. And probably 95% of my thoughts were negative and worried. And that really made me step back and go, wow, I am worried all day long. And that if you get a perspective of, if you prove to yourself, again, you have to write this down to look
I
at it.
love it. Yeah.
So when you prove to yourself that you literally have nothing but negative thoughts, you're going to be like, oh, that's true. I need to change something. So,
I love that. Thank you for sharing that additional tool. Wow, I could talk to you for additional hours. Looks like we have
we'll jump
lots
back
of
on here
things.
and do this again for
Yes,
sure. Absolutely.
because you made me think of other themes that we could bring and discuss and see all our different perspectives and experiences. And thank you, really thank you for your courage, to share things and talk about things that we usually don't talk about.
Absolutely. I think, like I said before, you got to get it out of your head and into the open. And you really want to try and tell as many people as will listen that I have a problem and that's okay. And you're not making an excuse for how you are, because if I were to, this is the last thing I'll say on this, but you got to be careful about how you do that. Because if I were to take it and say, I have ADHD, therefore I can't pay attention, I'm going to always stink at this, I can't work, I'm sorry. That's not you don't want to do that, because you're not helping yourself. You're just creating additional excuses or rationalizations, because life doesn't care that you have ADHD. Life is still life. But if you come at it from a different angle and say, I have ADHD, and again, ADHD, I have autism, I have dyslexia is actually, I think it's the most common learning disability. All these things, and there's so many that I'm not mentioning, and it's Mental Health Awareness Month too. So
Perfect. Yay.
right, yeah, all of these disabilities we have,
Yes.
we have to get it out and say, I have this, and that's okay. There's probably nothing I can ever do, or rather it'll never be cured, and that's okay. We have to be realistic about it. Some things maybe can, but things, learning disabilities, we're not at that level in technology, if we ever will be. From there, you say, okay, no, Lucy, I want you to know this about me. I can't pay attention very well because of this, this, and this. But this is what I'm doing to pay attention. I apologize if I miss a few things that you said. That's transparent. And most people are going to very much respect you for that. And it's going to make them step back and go, okay. And you don't have to do that at every, I don't do that at my business meetings, but you want to be transparent with people as much as you can be. Lucy, this is who I am. This is what I've been through in my life. And hey, I'm not doing it for sympathy. I just want you to know that's okay. And I want other people, I mean, I want everybody to know, like, hey, my story is not unique. There's so many people like me. A lot of people are afraid to say it, and even more
Okay.
people have had worse. But hey, we're the sum of our scars, and what we do with all the character building that has come out of this. Now, there's a lot of trauma, and trauma is also our responsibility to work through, because trauma is it's not brain damage per se, but it's it's what our brains do to try and protect us. We want to try and fix what we can fix, and from there, whatever's left, that's what we try and maximize on, and that's all we can do. And as long as you do that, you have done the best with what you've been given, and there is that is honorable beyond all else.
Beautiful. Wow. Thank you.
The other stance of that is you can be bitter about it, and you can be angry about it, and it's okay to be bitter and angry for a while. And most people I know, when they find out that they have a problem, they're actually happy, like I was. Other people are not, and it's not a sin to be angry or mad. But to get bitter and to think that the world's cursed you and you've been dealt the worst hand, I don't know if that's ever going to help you, because it's not going to change your situation. Accept where you are and accept that there's help out there. Take that help and enjoy the rest of your life, because you only get one, and you got to work with what you're given. And I would rather, there's two people you can be at the end of your life. You can be the grumpy old person who has just watched their whole life go by and feels like everything's been stolen for them, or you can be the older person who's sitting on their porch, rocking back and forth and saying, you know what, it was all right. I did the best I could with what I did. I helped as many people as I could, whether that be through business or through community work or through anything. I would much rather be that person who's at peace than the person who feels like his life was stolen.
Wow, I love that. And it brings me back to what you've shared before, kind of reinventing yourself, even when other people don't agree, especially when we grow and we change. For other people, it is uncomfortable too, because now they have to change how they deal with us. And that's an additional topic for another probably session.
I like that. Yeah.
Because now it forces them to kind of adjust, and people don't like to adjust. Sometimes change is uncomfortable.
Oh, I'm going to jump in just real quick and say one more thing, because you made such a good point. I don't know if I came back around on my story about my parents, but again, my parents still think that what I have is not a big deal, or that I'm faking it, or that I'm trying to be somebody I'm not. Like, that's going to be tough for anybody who's trying to reinvent themselves. And the poor truth is my parents are probably going to go to their grave thinking that about me. And we have to be okay with that. If you believe that there's a life after this, then maybe you'll have some more time to convince them. But, all we can do is love our parents. We have to accept the fact that they may never change their minds about us. And it could be your parents, your friends, hopefully not your spouse, because that's a longer time, but maybe even that too. And through our actions and the good that we can bring about through reinventing ourselves, that's going to change their minds eventually, probably anyway. But if it never does, we have to weigh it. Do I want to be full of joy and living my life to the best of my extent, or do I just want to keep people comfortable? Because what you said, Lucy, is 100%. They're going to get uncomfortable because they see change, and no one likes change. But I don't think it's selfish to be resilient against even that, and to understand that you got to take care of you, because you haven't done it for so long.
Wow. My mind is just going, wow, this is another big topic that we could talk for a very long time.
Yeah, we'll have to do that. That'll be a lot of fun.
Yes. Yay. Fantastic. So I'm putting your name for the next round, around possibly how do we deal with when we are growing and others are uncomfortable? How do we choose ourselves? How do we reinvent ourselves? And what I love is to have the freedom to decide who we are instead of listening to all the labels or believing them.
We have the freedom, and we got our worst jailer is ourselves. We're the only ones who can really take our freedom away, at least in here. Yeah. So that is like you said, a topic for another time, but yeah, it'll be a fun one.
Fantastic. Wow. We are out of our time, so we need to finish for today, but you've shared so many gifts, so many valuable and precious gifts with me and with anybody who's watching. There's so many gems in what you've shared and many tools. I can wait to put it all together and share it in the video once we all edit it. And I want to rewatch it again and make some notes. So thank you. Thank you for sharing. Really appreciate you and can't wait to have you again for the next series.
Oh, no problem, Lucy. Thank you for creating a platform like this. And, you know, if you yourself or anybody else, you know, wants to reach out and talk about this stuff, please message me on LinkedIn. I'd be more than, I have an open profile, so I should be able just to chat.
Okay.
You send me a message. So that's to anybody who wants to chat about that stuff. But yeah, sounds good, Lucy. I love what you're doing. Let's, you know, let's try and see the whole elephant.